Hello, this is Wizard Cutie 888. I'm going to be reading some more creepypasta on creepypasta.com. We're going to be reading Ascending the Tower of Blood. It was published on May 29th, 2026. It's about bites and rituals, curses, dark secrets, familiars, hitman, killer, mark, lynch, vampires, wonder liquor. The estimate time read is 39 minutes. And it's still loading, so I don't know if it's gonna be loading for that long, but we're gonna see how far it loads, and then we may or may not stop the story. We don't know. So I'm gonna start. When I entered the tower on that fateful night, I honestly didn't think I'd make it out alive. My mission was one of the extreme danger as I walked into a hell on earth and faced an enemy beyond my comprehension. I could never have anticipated what I discovered on the top floor of the godforsaken tower block. The decision I've made is not an honorable one. I'll be the first to admit that. But I had my reasons, and before you judge me, I ask that you hear my story. It was a chilling experience, even walking through the rundown and decrepit housing estate en route to the cursed tower. I was almost as if the evil and decay which accompanied the building was spreading and slowly contaminating the surrounding community. There were few residents still living on the estate, with most of the homes boarded up and abandoned. The threat which infaced the stories was well known, and all who could had long since fled. The buildings themselves were slowly crumbling, and the streets were strewn with the rubbish and the debris. Even the street lights were falling, since the console workers refused to perform maintenance here. No right-thinking person would walk these streets, let alone approach the North Tower of the Blood. But yet, this was where I was headed. I'll admit the feeling of apprehension and fear as I marched down the darkness alleyways, shivering in the cold night's air and jumping at every sound and shadows as I feared something was following me. Was I paranoid? Maybe, but I wasn't prepared to take any chances. I pushed forward, navigating the decrepit urban labyrinth, whilst seeing no one and nothing other than the occasional scaring rodents. But my courage almost failed me once I stood below the tower and looked up, observing the coarse structure in close detail for the first time. Much of the tower was rutted in darkness, with windows boarded up and floats long since vacant. But a few lights were visible across the dozen levels, a chilling reminder that people still live in this urban hell. But what chilled me to my bones was the enormous red light visible on the top floor, a hellish illuminating emanating from the penthouse. This was where he lived, my target. I couldn't see the monster from the street level, but I knew he was up there, and I had a good idea where evil went on within those four walls. The fear I experienced in the moment was almost paramount. A voice inside my head was screaming at me to run, to leave this place and never come back. But I fought back against the fear, strengthening myself and remembering the promise I'd made. I needed to go through with this, no matter what the outcome. I straightened my back and secured by the rucksack, feeling some comfort from the weight as I remembered what I was carrying. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward and wrapped my ankles against the heavy steel door. Ankles? Knuckles. I noted how secure the entrance was, and I wondered whether this was to keep people out or keep them in. I believed I knew the answer. There was no response to my first knock, and my anxiety increased as I feared my contact wouldn't show. If the door remained locked, my mission would be over before I began. I knocked again, harder this time. There was a tense wait before I heard the clicking of locks from the far side before the heavy door slowly swung open. A pair of saloon and suspicious eyes stared out at me, and the young woman addressed me. "You're Tyler?" she asked. "Yep," I replied. "You're Zara, I take it?" The woman was slight and had short, dark hair. She wore baggy jeans and a sweater a few sizes too big for her. I noticed her pale skin and the dark shadows under her eyes. Zara looked exhausted and drained, which was understandable given the house she was forced to live in. At first glance, Zara was not much to look at, appearing like a strong gust of wind could blow her over. But that was only my intentional impression. When I looked deeper, I saw the fire in her hazel brown eyes advanced of her defense and will to fight. The bravery Zara showed that night, I'll never forget it. "Quick, come inside," she ordered, whistles consistently glazing out at the street. I did as I told, stepping into the lobby. Whistled Zara slammed the steel door shut behind me. I'll admit to experiencing another pang of anxiety as I watched Zara scouring with the locks, cutting off my exit to the outside world. The first thing I noticed about the lobby was how bright and modern it looked compared to the decrepit and crumbling exterior. With new tiles and freshly painted walls, I was surprised at how welcoming the lobby appeared. I didn't comment, but Zara must have picked up on my surprise. "Looks good, right?" she quipped. "That's how the spider lures in the flies." I turned to look upon my female companion, nothing the grim smile on her lips. "The rest of the building doesn't look like this?" I asked. "Not at all," she replied. "Every other floor in dark, damp, and disgusting. They keep the lobby clean to maintain the facade of normalcy. This is as far as any outsiders will come, deliverers, caremen, etc. No one dares to ascend the tower. Not the consul, social services, or even the police." "Yeah, I know it," I answered solemnly. Zara gave me a suspicious look, and I feared I'd said too much. Therefore, I quickly changed the subject and nodding towards the shut steel door of the elevator. "Are we taking the lift?" I inquired. "No," Zara answered firmly. "The elevator is under their control and only used during the midnight call. We can't operate the lift without giving ourselves away." I nodded my head, feeling frustrated but not surprised. "So the stairs it is then?" I asked. "Yeah, but it's not that easy. There are 2 ways up and down the tower, the main staircase and the fire escape. Trouble is, the brothers have put up barricades as a security measure. That means we have to cross a half-dozen floors to make our way up to the penthouse." "Okay," I answered. "Is that going to be a problem?" Zara sighed and lowered her head before replying. "It shouldn't be, but we need to be careful, and you need to follow my lead. There aren't many residents still left in the tower, but I know them all. Some are on our side, others serve the enemy, and the rest are either indifferent to or too far gone to care. If we're careful and quiet, we can reach the penthouse undetected by midnight. That was one element of plan I couldn't understand. Why midnight? Why couldn't we do this during the daytime? Zara shook her head before responding. It wouldn't work. He locks himself inside a safe room during the day. Solid steel doors. No way in. Midnight is when he summons the residents to give their nightly tribute. That's when he's vulnerable. That's when we get to him. I understood the logic, but also saw the risk. The he Zara referred to was Max, the tyrant. He was the one I'd come here to kill. The plan seemed solid, but clearly it was fraught with danger. But I couldn't show any fear now, not in front of Zara. Okay then, shall we get on? I asked. Zara raised her eyebrows. Don't you want your money first? She inquired. I mumbled, whistles, trying to recover. You have a cash? Zara reached into her pocket and withdrew a stuffed brown envelope, which she handed to me with some reluctance. I took hold of said envelope, opened it to view the collection of crisp 50-pound notes inside. Next, I frowned, doing a rough count of the money, like that was the whole reason I was here. $10 ground up front, the balance upon complaints of the job. That's what we agreed, right? I met Zara's gaze and nodded my head in confirmation. Yes, that's right. We're good to go. One more thing, Zara added, as she delayed our ascent just a little longer. I would like to see what you're carrying. I stood confused for a moment before realizing she wanted to view the contents of my rucksack. I was naturally defensive. Why? I asked in annoyance. Zara shrugged her shoulders. We're paying you handsomely for one night's work. I want to make sure you've come prepared before we go any farther. I wasn't happy with Zara's demand, but had no good reason to refuse her. Fine, I answered relentlessly, before pulling the bag from my shoulder and opening the zipper. Zara inspected my flashlight, studio dagger, and revolver. It looks like it belongs in a museum, she said, referring to the gun. It's an old firearm, but still reliable, I replied defensively. Zara looked at me like I was an idiot. You know bullets won't kill him, don't you? Don't worry. I've taken this into consideration, I answered cryptically. Okay, she replied. And what else have you got? I carefully removed my box of trinkets from the bag, opening it to reveal the array of weapons and oddities inside. Nice. That's more like it, Zara said. Unequivocally, as I zipped my bag. But tell me, Tyler, how many of his kind have you killed? I felt another pang of anxiety upon my heart, hearing the question. I could have lied, of course. I hadn't been truthful with Zara, not at all. I had sold myself as an underworld hitman for hire. She thought I was only in it for the money and couldn't know the job was personal for me. But this felt like a lie. Too many, and so I decided to be honest for once. I've never killed one, I muttered nervously. Are you fucking kidding me? she cried. You told me you could take him out. And I can, I shouted back. I'm a professional and have done my research. I'll get the job done, lady. Trust me. I don't think Zara believed me. Surely she could see through my cover story. I saw her shake her head and look back toward the front door. For a moment I feared she'd call the whole thing off, but thankfully she decided against it. It's too late, she said with a deep sigh. This might be our last chance to take a bastard out. We must move ahead. Experienced a wave of relief as I secured my bag and followed Zara through the lobby and towards the stairwell and across yet another Rubicon as we left this area of relevant safety and entered the true Tower of Blood. The staircase was dimly lit and worn, but that wasn't what concerned me. What I picked up on was the combination of unsettling senses, not only the darkness, but also a foreign odor and icy cold chilling immensity from the floor above. And looked down at the steps. I noted a stain of dark crimson on the carpet. The trail of blood, Zara explained. It leads all the way to the top floor. I wanted to ask a follow-up question or two, but before I could open my mouth, the tense silence was broken by a blood-curdling scream from upstairs. I felt a chill run through me and looked to Zara with concern, but the woman simply shrugged her shoulders before saying, "Just another night in the tower. Now shall we?" Zara led, and I consistently followed, walking with her into the darkness. We were able to bypass the first floor, but had to navigate the second level. Because the staircase was blocked by a makeshift barricade constructed of old furniture and assorted debris, the second floor was shrouded in darkness since most of the corridor lights were out. I used my battery-powered torch to illuminate our path, but I froze in terror when I saw a face in the light. I screamed before I could stop myself and reached for my bag of weapons, but Zora stopped me, placing a firm hand on my arms before shouting in my ear, "Don't. That's just Mildred." I kept the torch forged on the pale face in the darkness. What I saw was a middle-aged woman clad in the solid dressing gown, her hair matted and her hair pupil dilated. There was something very disturbing about Mildred as she stood in the corridor looking straight at me. At first, I couldn't believe she was human, but once I observed her in closer detail, I confirmed she was indeed a woman. But she was in wretched physical state, and her wide eyes were filled with madness. As the tense standoff continued, Mildred opened her crusty lips to reveal rotting yellow teeth, and then she stared to laugh. A twisted, manic chuckle which echoed down the corridor and brought a fresh chill down my spine. As Zara attempted to calm the crazed woman, stepped forward with her hands held up defensively as she spoke softly. "It's okay, Mildred. There's no need to be scared. We're just passing through." But Mildred couldn't be reassured. Her laughter turned into a scream of terror as she turned on her heels and flee down the corridor, soon disappearing back into the shadows. Zora called after her neighbor, but it was no good because Mildred was gone. I looked to my guide, her face illuminated by the torchlight. What I saw in her tear eyes was a mixture of sadness and fear. "Is she going to be a problem for us?" I asked, referring to Mildred. "No," Zara replied with a firm shake of her head. Mildred's harmless. She's been here since the beginning, when Max first came to the tower and turned her home into a living hell. Zara turned to meet my gaze, her eyes now filled with a furious defense. Years of torture and abuse. It's left Mildred a wreck, a shell, barely recognizable. That's what a fucker has done to her. What he'll do to all of us if he's allowed to. That's why he needs to be stopped. Do you understand, Tyler? He needs to die tonight. I nodded my head to acknowledgement. I understand more than Zara realized. But no, now wasn't the time to relieve these. Any more surprises on this level? I asked nervously. No, Zara replied. Mildred's the only one left on the floor. Just her, and the rats now. We need to move on. The fire escape will take us up to the 4th floor. I have friends there, people I'd like you to meet. I nodded my head once again, not sure what Zara could mean by friends, but realizing I needed to follow her lead in this dangerous and unpredictable environment. The second stairwell was even grimmer than the first, as we had to negotiate the rubbish-strewn steps in the dark. I jumped when I heard the sound of scaring creatures under my feet, which Zara assured me were only rats. More concerning still were the ominous noises carried down the stairwell, pained sobbing and hellish screams, further warning of the horrors to come. But the next floor we entered seemed like an oasis in comparison. Yes, the carriages were still dark and depressing, and the majority of the flats were abandoned and closed off. But the lights were slightly more welcoming, and the flat Zora brought me to was in fact a home. 40 was the number on the door, and Zora knocked with confidence. We waited for a moment before the door opened, and the gray-haired, spectacles-wearing man answered, a smile appearing on his crusty lips as he welcomed his guest. Zora, he exclaimed enthusiastically. Thank God you're here. I was getting worried. I was surprised when my noised guide embraced her neighbor in a hug. Sorry I'm late, she said before making the necessary introductions. Professor, this is Tyler. He's the contractor we've hired to solve our problem. Tyler meets Professor Hangen. Hangen? Huh? Please call me Jim, the man replied, whistling, offering his hand in friendship. We appreciate you coming out, Tyler. You've no idea how much we needed your service. Please come inside so we can talk. Zora entered first, and I soon followed, grateful to have reached temporary sanctuary on our ascent. Hungan Flat was giant but dated. Hungan's flat was giant but dated. There was a musky smell inside. The decor looked like throwback to the 70s, and the room were full of clutter. In the interior corridor, we walked past a bookcase stacked to the brim with obscure academic works. I noted some of the tiles on the cover. A history of us, accurate, crippled hauntings of a modern era, investigations of the paranormal, and so on. I was starting to wonder what kind of professor Hangun really was. He entered the flat's small living room and was surprised to see others, a woman and a boy, sitting inside. Hangun didn't seem like a family man to me, and so I'd assumed he lived alone. A woman sat on the sofa, a blank expression on her drawn face. Physically, she looked similar to Zara, pale and thin, except there was nothing wrong. Something's missing in her, whistled Zara. Still had a fight left in her. This dead-eyed, unresponsive woman seemed to have been broken by her grim situation. The boy, who I assumed was her son, could have been 11 or 12. It was difficult to tell for sure, because the child approached malnourished, and presumably this had stunted his growth. The boy was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, watching a football match on an ancient television set with the poor picture and a sound off. He didn't bear any resemblance to Hengen, and so I guess the professor wasn't the boy's father. "Hey, Mara," she said, whistle, leaning down to kiss the woman on the cheek. Mara didn't respond or even seem to notice the small act of affection, as she continued to stare blankly at the wall. "Hi, Billy," Zara said, as she playfully ruffled the boy's hair. "What's the score?" "Nile, the child answered, without diverting his attention from the screen. "Cup of tea?" Hengen asked amicably. "Sounds good, Jim," Zara answered with a smile. We followed the professor into the flat's small kitchen, where he put on an electric kettle. "Well, Kyler," Hengen said as he looked me up and down, "what do you think of our little tower block?" "It has its charms," I replied sarcastically, prompting a dry laugh from Hengen. "We can't stay for long," Zara warned as Hengen headed out the mugs of tea. "We're already behind schedule, and we must reach the penthouse before midnight." "Yes," Hengen replied with a firm nod. "You're right, of course, but I wanted a chance to speak with Tyler before the fireworks started. Now then, young man, do you know what you've gotten yourself into?" I was about to answer, but Zara interrupted me. "He's not killed one of them before," she said. I felt embarrassed and inconvenient to the moment, but Hengen surprised me by shrugging his shoulders. "It doesn't surprise me. Based on my research, the last hunter of these beasts died during the 19th century. There are few alive in the modern era who have encountered such a creature, or unfortunate situations is quite unique." He sighed deeply and took a gulp of hot tea before continuing. "Honestly, this plan is a long shot, a Hail Mary, as the Americans would say. But you see, Mildred, what we've been reduced to after years of torture. We must take action now while there is still a slim hope of success. I already knew the difficulty task ahead of me, and so Hengen's words of warning were no great revelation, but one thing still puzzled me. "Why don't you people just leave?" I asked. "You could pack up and walk out one morning, and this nightmare would be over." Zara scoffed it in contempt, like my question was ridiculous. Hengen laughed, but he did provide an answer of sorts. "You know, I was writing a paper when I first came to this place. I thought I'd be studying a case of collective Psychosis. I never imagined the urban legend could be true. But I entered this tower of my own free will, and I've been trapped here ever since. Still, despite all the horror we've had to endure, we do have a community here. I guess that's part of the reason we stay. Zora and I couldn't leave in good conscience whilst leaving our neighbors behind. But it's more than that. At first, I theorized the resistance were suffering from a variation of Stockholm syndrome. Now I know the truth. The tyrant was a psychological, perhaps supernatural, held over us. We're connected to him and cannot escape his vile grip. The only way to break the link to kill him is to kill him. That's why we need you, Tyler. Please don't let us down. I saw the position in the old professor's eyes and couldn't hold his gaze for long. I did wonder whether Hagen knew the truth about me, knew that this was personal for me and I wasn't in it for the many. There was no time for further question, however, as Zora took charge. We need to go, she said firmly. I nodded my head and set down my mug. Good luck, Hagen said as we made for the floor. I'll see you both up there. We returned to the main stairwell to avoid the barricades. The path was clear, but my feelings of grim foreboding only increased as we encountered. I heard the occasional mumbling voices of screams, and always quit despite sobbing. I didn't know how many people still lived in the hellish tower. Most of the flats were long vacant, but undoubtedly some were still compacted on the floors we passed. It saddened and angered me to think of these torn souls abandoned by uncaring society and left to starve as the flood source of bloodthirsty monsters. But I wasn't surprised from the evil. Someone I cared about had fallen full of the tower trap. This was what drove me on the escape. Mine was a mission of revenge. We soon reached the next floor we were forced to cross. Zara warned me to be careful as we negotiated the darkness carried by torchlight. I wish she'd been more specific. We were half way across the floor when I heard a low growl from the shadows behind me. I turned around an instant, using my torch to illuminate the threat. All I saw was teeth and fury as the beast charged towards me. I had no time to draw a weapon or run as the bearing hound leaped on top of me, using his strength to knock me down to the 50th floor. I cried out and raised my arm to protect myself with the heavy weight of the hound on my chest. But the dog bit deep into my arm, causing me to scream in agony. I couldn't fight off the beast, and for it I was done for. But then I heard a high-pitched whistle, closely followed by an authoritative call from my champion. No, Siberius, come here, boy. To my immense surprise and relief, the dog obeyed Sirius' orders. Releasing my arm and abandonedly running to Zora's side, I ignored the pain and jumped up, picking up my torch and using the light to illuminate the scene. What I saw was a huge Rottweiler with the blood still dripping from his mouth. Except now the mutt was docile and obedient, sitting at Mara's command as she feed him a treat from her pocket. Are you hurt? Zora asked me. I looked down at my bloodlet forearm. He bit me pretty good. Well, he bit me pretty bad, but I think I'm alive. Zora nodded her head. I'm sorry, Tyler. I thought Cerberus was locked in, but he must have escaped. The brothers bought him as a guard dog, but they lost interest and left him down here. I've been looking for the mutt ever since. I watched the bewilderment as Zara gently scratched the dog under his chin. Not all of Max's victims are human, as you can see, Zara said solemnly. Next, she shone her torch on her magly arm. That looks nasty, she said with concern. Let's head to the next floor and I'll get you bandaged up. Cerberus and I exchanged hostile glares as we walked by, but the hound let me pass and we were able to proceed. I smelt the stench of blood feces as we reached the end of the corridor, and did feel some sympathy for Cerberus, realizing the squalor the dog had to live in. But the shit was nothing compared to the enormous stench of blood and death, which only got worse as we climbed yet another set of stairs. Zora explained that the next floor was where she lived. Are you going to invite me in for a coffee? I asked, half a jest. Not a chance, Zora answered with a laugh. My place isn't fit for visitors, but I'll bring you to the guns. They have a first aid kit and can get you fixed up. I need to speak to them anyway. Thus far, the residents I've encountered inside the damned tower were disturbed or broken, so I wondered what the just would be like. I don't think I could have predicted what I found. The Jones flat was numbered 8A. The front door was well managed and looked like it'd been recently painted. There was a decorated knocker on the display, and the doormat read "Welcome." It almost felt surreal as Zora knocked, and a moment passed before the elderly woman with the long white hair, kind-eyed and warm smile opened the door. Oh, hello, Zara, the woman said pleasantly. You're out late. How can we help? Evening, Celia. This is my friend Tyler. I'm afraid he had a bit of an accident. I raised my arm to show her the bite wound. Oh dear, that looked nasty, said Celia, with a genuine concern in her voice. We were hoping to use your first aid kit. We were hoping to use your first aid kit, Zara said. Of course, Sally replied. Please come inside. Henry will get to the kit from the kitchen. Henry. She called out to her husband, whistling, walking down the interior corridor, allowing Zara and I to follow her inside. The Jones flat was similar to Hagen's in that it was home, but the personal torches were more evident. I have to say that the interior of the couple's flat was immaculate, and I couldn't see a spark of dust or dirt. The walls and the bookcases were adorned with photographs of family members. The decor was inviting and homely. Please go into the living room, Celia shouted, whistled. She was helping her husband in the kitchen. We did so, entering a cozy room with the dated but well-maintained furnishing. Zelda and I sat on the sofa and waited. For her, this must have been a familiar route, but I found the whole situation bizarre, to say the least, because this comfortable little flat seemed like an abnormality in the otherwise decayed and dangerous tower block. Cecilia soon entered the room whistled, carrying a glass of water while her husband Henry closely followed with the grain first aid bag. Henry was a tall, thin man, held, mild, and subject, but with a kind smile which matched that of his wife. "Oh, goodness," Henry explained once he saw my bite wound. "Let's get that seen to, young man." What followed was a team effort as Zora and his guns cleaned, dressed, and bandaged my wounds, a process that took several minutes as an elderly couple engaged in political conversation. The Jones were the top of the people. You would want us to as your grandparents, and for that brief time I felt safe despite the seriousness of the situation. But I noted how Zora was uneasy, consistently looking at her watch as it kept ever closer to midnight. Once the bridge was on and secure, Stella extended her hospitality. "Now then, how would you two like a cup of tea and maybe some sandwiches?" "No, thank you," Zara replied firmly. "We're on a tight schedule and need to get on. But I have to talk to you both about tonight." Zara seemed visibly upset at the mere mention of the evening events, and she quickly left the living room without uttering a word. Meanwhile, Henry shook his head, wistfully waggling his bony finger. "Now, Zora, you know that talk upsets my missus." "I know, Henry, but this is serious. I explained to you what's the stake tonight, what needs to happen. You and your wife must be prepared." Henry shook his head vigorously. No, this will not do, Zara. We don't get involved in these things. You know this. My wife and I simply want to enjoy our retirement in peace." Zora was clearly becoming experienced. "But this is what happened, whether you like it or not," she exclaimed. Henry took a deep breath before replying. "Tonight is just like any other night as far as we're concerned. That's all I have to say on the matter." Zora's head dropped. Clearly she was upset, but she seemed to accept that she couldn't change the old man's mind. "Okay then, Harry. Take care of Silly. And yourself too. We'll be on our way." Henry forced a smile, and turning to me and saying, "It was a pleasure to meet you, Tyler. I hope your arms heal up well." I nodded my head and I thanked the man, and a moment later I was following Celia back out into the corridor. "What's the matter with those two?" I asked. "Once we were out of the flat and the door was slammed shut." Zora shook her head, glancing down the corridor, and she replied, "The Jones are in deep denial. Have been for years. They've created their own little bubble in the flat, ignored the horrors outside their door. Sure, they give Max what he wants, his tribute, but they disassociate from the act and pretend it's not happening." She paused briefly, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. "In many ways, Henry and Celia are the saddest, most lost people in the whole tower, but there's nothing we can do for them now." She looked at her watch once again. "We need to move quickly. Just one more floor to cross before we reach the top, but we must be very careful." One would have expected the decay and rot to get worse as we approached the summit of the tower block, but this wasn't the case. The next floor was the last before we reached the penthouse, and I was shocked by the construct, noting the well-lit corridor, freshly painted walls, and a new carpet. But perhaps I couldn't have been surprised by the improvement in conditions. This floor is where the Lee brothers live, Zora whispered as we exited the stairwell. Denny and Tommy. Nasty shits, the both of them. Years ago, they made a deal with Max and agreed to serve the tyrant in exchange for personal treatment. The brothers are Max's enforcers. They keep us in line during the daylight hours and make sure all the residents give their tributes at midnight. That's the routine, and the bastards make sure it runs like clockwork. Well, then, I guess we'll have to deal with the brothers, I said. Wiltz reached into a bag of weapons. No, Zara said firmly as she placed her hand on the uninjured arm. That's not the plan. Yes, the brothers will pay for their crimes, but we need to get Max first. After that, the Lees will be leaderless and weak. We have to sneak through without drawing their attention. Otherwise, they'll raise the alarm. I wasn't sure I agreed with Zara's plan of action, but she knew the tower and its people for better than I did, so I felt I needed to trust her judgment. We were so close to crossing the parliament floor safely and without drawing attention. It was only bad luck that Zora's plans failed. Because as we quickly progressed down the corridor, the door of one of the flats swung open and the foul-faced man piled out. I later learned the man was Denny Lee, but at the time he was simply a threat in our way. Denny was a slob in a stained vest, plumped and well-fed, in sharp contrast to the malnourished competitives in the flats below. His chin was covered with untidy stubbles, and his eyes were red and bloodshot, although I guessed this was due to his half-empty whiskey bottle in his right hand. Denny struggled out into the corridor in drunken haze. He was blocking our path to the fair stairwell. Zora and I just froze, not sure what to do next. Denny took a moment to figure out what was happening. He looked at us with surprise and confusion before he clicked in his head. His eyes narrowed and his lips curled as he forced his fury on Zora. You trottis bitch, Denny snarled before he changed forward. His huge hands reached for my companion's throat. He knocked Zora down to the ground and throttled her with utter fear. I darted forward, grabbing the thug and using all my strength to drag him off. We wrestled on the floor for a moment as I tried to subdue him, but Denny broke free and yelled for help. Tommy, we're in trouble. Get the fucking shooter. This didn't sound good. I looked at Zora, who was slowly recovering from attempted strangulation. She mouthed 2 words to me. Stop him. I turned to see Denny running back toward the open door of the flat. I reached into my bag and grabbed the first weapon to hand, the dagger. I didn't think, only acting on a murderous intent, and I hit Denny's head hard, stabbing him repeatedly in the back. The man's blood spilled all over the new carpet. His body collapsed heavily to the floor, and he exhaled a terrible death rattle before shifting off the mortal coil. I looked down at the body in near disbelief. I had sold myself as a hitman, but in fact I never killed anyone, not until now. I was frozen in shock for a second, but Zora brought me back to reality as she recovered from the attack and jumped to her feet, shouting, Tyler, we've got to run. I followed her down the corridor and just in time because a moment later, Tommy charged out of the flat with his sewn-off shotgun in hand. I glanced back as we ran, seeing the shock and grief in Tommy's eyes when he saw his brother's bloody corpse. This kept him occupied for a moment, but soon his grief turned to rage as he raised his gun and aimed. Watch out, I screamed, whistled, Simmons tracking Zara to the ground. A shot rang out, the back shot flying just above our heads. Tommy cursed as Zara and I scrambled for the door to the stairwell. We made it by the skin of our teeth as another shot struck the door frame. Still scrambling, I reached into the bag and I desperately searched for my revolver. But suddenly a loud, sharp siren blasted out, almost drowning out all the other sounds. I reckoned this was the building fire alarm, but didn't think it was being used for its original purpose. "What the hell?" I screamed to Zara, struggling to be heard over the din. "We're out of time," Zara shouted back. "That's the signal for the ritual. We need to get upstairs now. It's our last chance." We darted up the final stairwell, the siren blasting in our ears. When we reached the top floor, I noticed the lift was now operational, stopping on multiple floors on its way down. "Tommy's collecting the residents for their nightly tribute," Zara shouted as an explanation. "The master's need must be catered to. We have time, but not much." We ran so quickly down the final corridor that I hardly had time to take in the details, let alone consider the danger we were running into, although I couldn't help but notice the dark stains on the carpet, the end of the ominous trail of blood. We reached a steel secretary door, similar to one at the front of the building. There was no name or number at the door, but it didn't take a jester to work out who lived here. I felt a jolt of adrenaline in the moment, hardly believing that my time had finally come. All those years of planning for revenge, and now I was here. But I also experienced fear in the moment, terror at facing the evil which dwelt within the penthouse, and also apprehension because I was afraid I might not be up to the task. Zara might have shared my anxieties in the moment, but she did not hesitate before entering through the already open door and facing the horrors inside. The penthouse interior passed me by in velvet blur, at least the first time I experienced it. I recall the enormous dim red light, the hideous decor consisting of botch-like artwork, furnishing crafts from human skin, and shutter on the windows to keep out the daylight. But worst of all was the stench, the foul odor of creepy death and vile rot. All the horror around me set my head spinning. But I followed Zara as she navigated the hellish apartment, and soon we arrived at the source of all the evil and corruption I had witnessed thus far. I don't know what I expected to find in the final room. I had never seen Max in the flesh before, although I spent so many years of my life thinking about the monster. I suppose I'd built up an image in my head, one of pure evil. Perhaps the centuries-old, bloody, sucking demon in human form was a disappointment to my eyes, but his appearance was horrifyingly none the less. Max was sitting upon a twisted throne of cold metal. His dark hair was slick black, and he wore a black torn suit, except his shirt was covered by a brised plastic bib. There was a reason he wore the bib, however, and that was to prevent the splatters of blood from staining his suit, because Max was feeding, his fangs embedded in the rest of the slaughter, red-haired woman who sat on his lap, a dead and drained look in her eyes as the monster greedily feasted on her blood. I stood awestruck and frozen in horror at the sight, hardly believing what I was witnessing. I heard a story of curse, but I did not think I truly believed it until the moment, because Max the Tyrant was a vampire, centuries old and sustained by the blood of his victims. The details were sketchy, but it seemed Max had arrived in the country years earlier and had picked this tower block as his new hunting ground. Most of the residents were killed outright in Max's killing spree, but the vampire was smart enough to keep a few alive so he could survive as his food source for years to come. So this was a dark secret at the heart of the Tower of Blood, and now the monster was staring me in the face, because Max was done with his victim, allowing her to crawl away into the corner, weak and drained, but still alive and conscious. And now the monster was glaring at Zara and me, his black, shriek-like eyes sizing us up, whilst the still fresh blood dripped from his long fangs and twisted lips. He used a white handkerchief to clean the blood from his chin and shot us a wicked smile. I was so transfixed with the monster that I barely noticed that the alarm stopped blaring. I wondered what that meant, but didn't have time to ask. Almost before the main course, Max said slyly. His voice was deep, chilling, and almost inhumane. "You are tired, I assume?" he asked. I felt sick to my stomach looking at Zara and seeing only shock in her eyes. Max laughed cruelly upon witnessing our reaction. "Honestly, Zara, did you really think I didn't know what you and Hung had planned? Nothing goes on in my tower without my knowledge." Zara looked beaten and totally defensed by the revelation. "I know it. It was up to me now." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I reached into my bag of weapons, but doubtably I couldn't do much. I heard stories of Max's superhuman speed and strength and didn't fancy my chances. But the vampire didn't make any effort to attack. In fact, he seemed quite relaxed as he stared right through me with his predatory eyes. "And yes, Tyler, I know who you are and why you're really here." My jaw dropped in disbelief. How could he possibly know? Could this monster read minds? I didn't have time to ask, however, as a procession of souls walked in through the door behind us. I turned to watch the March of Dawn as a long-suffering resident arrived to make their nightly blood tribute to Max, summoned by the vampire like rats, hypnotized by the Pied Piper. Some I recognized from my accent. Millard, her eyes wide and filled with sorrow and madness. Mr. and Mrs. Jones, both smiling innately as if they were attending Sunday dinner. Maria and Billy, the son leading his dead-eyed mother by the hand, and Professor Hongan, appearing puzzled by the situation, as he must have realized the plan had failed. There were only two, those I didn't recognize, since we've bypassed them on the way up, and at the end of the line was Tommy Lee, his fat, red face filled with rage once he saw me. "You murdering bastard!" Tommy cried, as his similarly stared to load fresh shells into the shotgun. He advanced with the gun in hand, and I tensed up, fearing the worst, but rescued to come from the most unexpected sources. "Put your weapon down, Tommy," Max commanded, his booming voice filling the room. Tommy looked visibly hurt by the order. "But he killed my brother," he exclaimed angrily. "Stand down, Thomas," Max roared, his demonic force bringing a chill to everyone in the room. Tommy didn't need to be told a third time. and he lowered his gun before retreating into the shadows. I yearn for my subject's blood, Max proclaimed, but I'm prepared to delay my nightly feast, if only to reveal the truth to my world-be assassin. The vampire was staring right at me again. I was still afraid, but also interrogated to know where this was going. You sought me out for revenge, Tyler, but there is no need. The woman you love has been here all along. He turned his head to face a shrewd door leading to the back room. Come out, my precious. There is someone here to see you. My legs were weak as I watched the red door slowly open, and my heart almost stopped when I saw the vision which walked out from the darkness. The body underneath a dress of crimson red, the hair, the eyes, the lips. It couldn't be her, could it? But it was. There standing before me was Valerie, the love of my life. Now we get to the truth of it all. My true motivation. Valerie was my lover so many years ago. We were engaged to be married, had our whole lives ahead of us, but then one night she disappeared without a trace. I'd gone to the police to report her as missing, but their investigations hit a dead end. I was like they didn't want to discover the truth. And so I conducted my own investigation, spending years of my life and my entire fortune in the process. That's how I discovered the whispered tales of the cursed tower and the monster who dwelt there. Valerie was last seen in the vacancy of the tower, and I was sure Max had taken her. I'd long since accepted Valerie's death at the hands of the beast. That's why I'd formulated this plan for revenge, and why I offered my services to Zara as a hitman for hire. But my planning was unraveled now, and all my assumptions were blown out of the water. I was frozen in that moment, staring helplessly at my beloved, unable to speak or react to her miraculous presence. Hey, stranger, long time no see, Valerie said with a smile. That was the moment I realized my Valerie wasn't the same. I saw something in her eyes, or rather I didn't see it. There was something missing, a spark of beauty and innocence now exchanged. This might have been proof enough of Valerie's transformation. But the confirmation came with her twisted smile, which revealed a pair of sharp fangs. The shock and despair I experienced was enough to break my silence. My God, Valerie, I said weakly, what has this monster done to you? Valerie laughed as she locked eyes with grinning Max. What has Max done to me? He said he set me free. That's what. He given me confidence, strength, and eternal life. She looked to me next, drawing me in with her beauty as a rush of emotions hit me. You can have it too, Tyler. Come join us and you'll live like a god. I felt sick, my stomach in knots and head spinning. It was too much to take in, and once again I was speechless. I didn't have any answer in that moment, but events moved quickly and spiraled out of my control. Zara, screamed Hangan as he stepped forward. Now's the time. The professor did his best trying to whistle the shotgun from Tommy's hands, but the thug was too strong for him. I watched in horror as Tommy threw Hangan to the floor before aiming and firing, blowing the professor's head clean off. Next, young Billy broke from the line and struggled with the gun-wielding thug. I feared the boy would be next to die since Tommy soon overpowered him, but seeing her son in danger broke Mara from her trauma-induced trance as she pulled a kitchen knife from under her blouse and drove at Tommy, screaming with a marital fury as she stabbed him repeatedly till the thug fired his gun harmlessly into the ceiling before falling. The room descended into a permanent in the moment, as some fled in a panic, whistled, others hide in the shadows, but Zara used this opportunity to grab the backpack from my shoulder. She worked quickly, opening my improvised hunting kit and withdrawed the sharp weapon strike. Next, she charged at Max with a murderous rage in her eyes. I had admired the woman's bravery, but her assault was doomed to fail. Max hardly exerted any effort as he dodged the attack before grabbing Zara from the throat and snapping her neck with a single flick of his wrist. My guide's limp body fell to the bloody stained carpet, and then the vampire turned his attention to me. "You cannot join us," Max exclaimed. "You are weak." He darted forward, but was stopped in his tracks, not by me, but by Valerie. She grabbed Max's arm and used her superhuman strength to hold him back. "No!" Valerie screamed as she risked it all to save me. "How dare you defy me?" Max screamed. Oh, I know I had to act in fast, grabbing hold of my bag and reached for my revolver, pulling back the hammer and aiming to fire. Meanwhile, Max struck Valerie hard, knocking her to the ground. Then he turned his anger back towards me. The vampire laughed when he saw the gun in my hand. He was so sure the weapon couldn't hurt him. But Max didn't know about the rounds loaded into the chamber. Bullets forged from pure silver. He charged and I pulled the trigger, firing twice in quick succession. Both bullets hit Max square in the chest, stopping him in his tracks. For a moment I feared the old trick hadn't worked, but then the silver coursed through Max's veins and he screamed in agony as his ancient body burned. The vampire was weakened, but I knew this was only a temporary state of affairs. The silver would not kill him, and I needed to finish the job. I looked at Zara's body, seeing the discarded stake by her side. Darting forward, I grabbed hold of the weapon and charged towards Max. The hated vampire was too weak to defeat himself. I saw the shock and fear in his dark eyes during that last moment, as his centuries-long existence came to an abrupt and violent end. I didn't hesitate before plugging the stake through his chest with all my might, piercing the monster's heart and ending his wretched life. Max fell screaming, his body burning on the soiled carpet until nothing was left but ashes. The monster was dead, my mission accomplished, but everything had changed since the start of this bloody night. The stake was still in my hand as I turned to face Valerie. She was one of them, and had surely fed on human blood to survive all these years. Surely the best thing to do was end her misery. And yet, I could not. My Valerie was still in there somewhere. Why else had she saved me from Max? I looked into her eyes and was sure I could see my beloved. "Tyler, please," she pleaded, as tears toiled down her pale cheek. "I never stopped loving you, not for a moment. You've sacrificed so much to get to me, but there's only one way we can be together. Let me share my gift with you, and our love will last forever." I ignored all the death, blood, and horror in the moment, my focus entirely on Valerie. As everything else faded away, I didn't say a word, but she knew what my heart wanted. Valerie marched towards me, and I dropped my stake. She embraced me, and it felt so good. I didn't scream when she bit my neck and drank my blood. Zora, Professor Hagen, and the Lee brother all died that night. Marie and Billy escaped during the chaos, and I believe they took Cerberus with them. Honestly, I was glad to see them go, but Mildred, the Johnseys, and the others are still trapped here, and more will come to restock our depleted numbers, fresh fleas caught in our web. Because Valerie and I rule the tower now, and our subjects come to us every night to offer their tribute. You might wonder whether I feel guilty. After all, I come to slay a monster, and instead I became one. I do not feel bad for Zora and Higgins, but their foolish rebellion was doomed from the get-go. I never wanted to become a bloodsucker, but this is the price I chose to be with Valerie. As for the feeding, it becomes routine after a while, a hunger that must be satisfied no matter what the moral cost. Judge me if you will, but I will be the woman who means the world to me, and ours. Judge me if you will, but I'm with the woman who means the world to me, and ours is love that will last forever. Credited Mark Lanch. Man, that was a good story. What in the world? What rank is that? It's not even loading. That's cool. I will say, that's pretty cool. Well, thank you for listening with me. Man, that was a long read. Sorry it took forever. But I did it. Man, that was a cool story. Kind of scary, I will say. But, vampires are fake.